Welcome to the 6th episode of Clarified. I'm Pastor Paul, and in this series, we study the scriptures to clarify the Christian life. Today, we're going to look at one of the most important chapters of the Bible, Genesis 3, which describes Adam and Eve's disobedience to God. Much has been said and written about this chapter, but we're going to consider it through the lens of family. In other words, we're going to especially focus on the role of the woman and the role of the man in this chapter. After doing that, we will have a look at the disastrous consequences of this colossal failure. So let's dive in by looking at Genesis chapter 3. We'll pick it up in verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" Now before we go any further, we need to picture the scene in light of what we know from Genesis 1 and 2. In Genesis 1 and 2, we saw Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden with God. God was one who created them, tasked them with the call to keep the garden, be fruitful, and multiply. Adam and Eve lived in the paradise of God and were unashamed. Their conscience was clean. They were happy in the presence of God. This is the picture before we see the serpent intrude in this beautiful scene. The serpent is introduced as crafty, sneaky, intelligent, but deceitful. And in his craftiness, the serpent strategically addresses the woman. For the serpent seeks to upset the created order that God had made. God made the man to be the head, so the serpent pretends as though the woman is the head. And both Adam and Eve allow it. For Eve does not ask her husband to answer, and Adam is there, as we see in verse 6, but doesn't do anything against the serpent. In other words, Adam and Eve allow the serpent to disturb the order that God had made for them. Eve becomes the head, Adam becomes the helper. The Apostle Paul observed this as well when we read 1 Timothy 2:12-14. He writes, "I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor." Point is this: God made men to lead, which means that God created them with gifts that fit those roles. Women were not equipped to have leadership in the family, nor are men equipped with the gifts that women received. The serpent knew this, so he began to address Eve as the leader and Adam as the helper, so he could deceive her, and it worked. Dear friends, this is crucial to understand, for the serpent's tricks haven't changed. He still seeks to bypass male leadership by motivating women to take this role. He does it in a variety of crafty ways. Chief among these is by positioning the idea of headship as being more important or requiring more talent. But this is not what the Bible teaches. Headship in the Bible is a role, a responsibility, just as being a helper is. One cannot function without the other. Let's read on and see how the conversation develops between the serpent and Eve. Genesis 3, 1-5, we'll pick it up again from verse 1. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it lest you die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You shall not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.'" So, what is the serpent doing here? Well, first, he exalts Eve to the head of the family by addressing her and not Adam. This causes her to become responsible for responding to the serpent as a leader, a role for which she was not created. Second, he sows doubt in her heart by suggesting God's words are untrue. This causes her to make a judgment call upon God, something she is not called to do. For God's covenant was with Adam as the covenant head. Third, the serpent suggests that Eve can become like God, knowing good and evil. This deceives her to see and think that God is an equal and not as he is, truly her God. Now, before we judge Eve and say that Adam would not have fallen, we would have to realize that he was there the whole time. For this is what we read next in verse 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. Adam was there the whole time. He was the head. He should have responded to the serpent, reject his false ideas, and refrain from eating the fruit. So Adam is the one who is held responsible in Romans 5 for his failure to interject. Adam failed to be the godly head that God called him to be, so that Eve was deceived. That's the scene. Now let's look at the consequences of this sin. The sin leads to 4 disastrous changes for men and women, and really the first family in Genesis. And we begin to see first that mankind began to experience shame. In the end of Genesis 2, we read that Adam and Eve were naked but not ashamed. They were innocent. They didn't have anything to cover themselves because they didn't need it. But now they have sinned. We read in verse 7, "Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths." As we read in verses 9 to 10 of Genesis 3, "But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, 'Where are you?' And he said, 'I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself.'" Mankind had become aware of his own nakedness. For the first time, Adam was afraid of God. The second consequence of sin is the woman's pain in childbearing. We see that in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, that God speaks to the woman, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children." Now this curse is very specific to the woman. It's God's punishment for her refusal to be faithful to God. God had given her the gift of bearing children, but now, because she had refused to obey God, God added pain to this blessing. The third change is the women's role as men's helper would no longer be a blessing, but a curse. This is another response to Eve's specific sin against God's order, as we discussed earlier. Genesis 3:16, it says, "Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you." The ESV supplies the word contrary here, and there's much discussion about what exactly is going on here. The main point of this is very clear. God won't allow the woman to rule over the husband. Instead, she will be subjected to him by force. Her husband will rule over her. God humbles her for her rebellion against God's order. Which brings us to the last consequence of the fall. Man's work would no longer be a joy, but a hardship. Genesis 3:17-19 we read, "And to Adam he said, 'Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat the plants of the field by the sweat of your face, and you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return.'" Look where God sets the emphasis. "Adam, you have listened to the voice of your wife and eaten of the tree which I commanded you not to eat." In other words, you obeyed your wife rather than me. Therefore, God says, He will make Adam's life hard, for the ground is cursed, and he will have to work for his food. And ultimately, he will return to the earth and become dust. Adam is judged for his failure to step in and protect his wife and take the role that God had given him responsibility over. So let's recap. The serpent tempted Eve. Eve did not turn to Adam, but took the place of Adam, and Adam followed his wife in this reversal of roles. They had chosen sin over righteousness, and they were about to be thrown out of the Garden of Eden. Now, God does not immediately kill Adam and Eve, but they receive this fourfold curse. They now start to feel shame and fear. The woman will have pain in childbearing. The woman is no longer joyfully relating to her husband, but now is placed under him by force. And the man will have to work hard and sweat for their survival. This, dear friends, is the world we live in. So, how do we live godly lives under this Adamic curse? Now, first of all, we need to recognize that becoming a Christian does not relieve us from the consequences of Adam's sin. In fact, Paul writes this in Romans 8 verse 23. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Even as Christians, we still await the redemption of our bodies. We long to be set free from the consequences of Adam and Eve's rebellion against God. Our bodies are still beset with the curse of that original sin. In other words, we still have a tendency towards sin. We notice this in our lives, both in marriage, family, and in work. There is still a remainder of shame and fear in us. Women still have pain in childbearing. The relationship between men and women is still challenging. And work is still hard in this world. We're redeemed as Christians, loved by God. But we're waiting for the redemption of our bodies, the reversal of the curse. The fall marked that moved mankind into sin is still present in this world. Now, what does that exactly mean for mankind and God's plan with mankind in the world? Well, we're going to see that in the next episode. But for now, let us conclude with some practical points for living in the world after the fall of mankind. We should expect a couple of things that Christians still face after they become believers. First, our relationship with God is threatened by fear and shame. So we need to keep growing in our relationship with God and our understanding of the gospel that helps us to live at peace with God. Secondly, we still experience pain in the world. It's a curse that has come down toward every human being. There's not a person in the world that is without pain. But that pain doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. It means that we're still waiting the full redemption. Third, the relationship between husband and wife is challenging. We still have the curse in our bodies, but we have a great hope because one day we will receive a new body that is free from this curse. So be patient with each other. Fourth and finally, work will be hard in this world, and we need to discipline ourselves. We need to strive against this curse in the body. In the original creation, work was pleasant and fulfilling, but in this fallen creation, it is filled with suffering. This is the message of Genesis 3. It's historic, and it shows that man's fall is not glorious, it's depressing, it's troublesome, it's sobering. It leaves us with a lingering question. What happens next? How do we get out of this curse? Well, next time we continue this story, and we see what happened to the children of Adam and Eve. We're going to see sibling rivalry. We're going to see the challenges that were faced upon all of mankind as this continued to grow. But also we're going to see strands of redemption, of salvation, and of hope. But for that, you're going to have to see the next episode. May God bless you. We will pray for you as you continue your journey in the Christian life. Thank you for watching this episode. If this episode was helpful to you, consider liking and subscribing. And don't be afraid to leave a comment or a question under this video, because we'd love to be in contact with you and to answer any questions you might have. May God bless you, and see you next time.